Alright, g'day IB psychologist. In the previous video, I explained the biological etiology of PTSD using the brain. Here we're going to look at sociocultural etiologies. What are the social and cultural factors that could increase the risk factors of developing post-traumatic stress disorder? We're going to focus on one in particular, socioeconomic status. Socioeconomic status is measured through your income, your employment, and your education. So generally speaking, wealthier people have higher socioeconomic status, poorer people lower socioeconomic status. Now the findings are really consistent. People from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are more at risk for developing PTSD following a traumatic event. Right? And so we see this in lots of studies with people going away to war veterans, those coming back, they're more likely to get PTSD if they come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Minority groups in particular as well, more likely to get PTSD following trauma. First of all, the first step is we have to lay that foundation. We have to clearly explain, look, there is a connection here. This socioeconomic status is directly linked to post-traumatic stress disorder. Two studies I really like for that. One is Garrison's study. This was on following Hurricane Andrew in Florida, and it found that racial minority groups were more likely to get PTSD than others. Now, you might be saying, well, hang on, that's minorities. That's not the same as socioeconomic status. Yes, true. That could be something definitely to evaluate when you're using that study. Although the study comes out of the United States, there's a pretty clear correlation there between race and socioeconomic status, generally speaking. But you're right to say that's a big assumption that we're making, so it could be something to add to the critical thinking. Now, in addition to that, we can see Irish's study shows there was, following car crashes, women were more likely to develop PTSD than men, and that difference is partly explained through income levels, right? And so again, socioeconomic status, income here links to post-traumatic stress disorder. So those two studies, hopefully read those, comprehend them, understand how they show a direct link here between low socioeconomic status and risk for PTSD. You got that? Hopefully you got that. Now we can go deeper and say why. Why is socioeconomic status linked to post-traumatic stress disorder? And here's where we get deeper and a little bit confusing. I'm going to give you two possible explanations. One is cognitive and one is biological. Let's start with probably the more straightforward one, which is the biological approach. Socioeconomic status has also been linked to brain development. So children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds have smaller amygdala and hippocampus. I should say they tend to have smaller amygdala and hippocampi. Right. So once you've built this foundation, you can then introduce the second variable here, which is the brain. The socioeconomic status could be influencing PTSD through its effects on the brain. We know that abnormalities in the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex are risk factors for PTSD, and they could be developed through low socioeconomic status. Luby et al.'s correlational study is really good for that. That shows that a correlation there between children growing up in low socioeconomic backgrounds have smaller amygdala and hippocampi than others, and so here we're seeing why. Now, the second explanation is to do with cognition. So why is low socioeconomic status linked with PTSD? It could be an increase in negative appraisals. An appraisal is your evaluation of a stressor and how you can cope with it, or the extent to which you can cope with it. So a positive appraisal would be something like, yeah, I can deal with that. That was pretty traumatic. That was pretty scary, but I've got this. It'll be okay. A negative appraisal, and if you have negative appraisals, you're more at risk for PTSD. A negative appraisal is like, I can't cope. I don't have the resources. I'm not going to be able to overcome this. Now think of this following Garrison's study. If you don't have much money and your family and your house is ruined by a natural disaster, suddenly your appraisals of that event are going to be far more negative, right? Because you're thinking, wait, are we going to be able to overcome this? Even think about if you need to go see a therapist, you have the money to pay for a therapist. If you have a car crash and you're injured, right? You think about the hospital bills. You think about, are you going to be able to cope? These negative appraisals following the traumatic event, which are linked to your socioeconomic status, put you more at risk for PTSD. And then here you can use some studies here that link appraisals to post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, and so there we have it. There's room there for 2 or 3 or 4 studies, but a really good explanation. But I want to come back to this central theme in these videos I'm explaining. It's really important that first you lay this foundation. You build your examiner's trust. You make it really clear that you explain, you stay on topic, you explain the factor, define what it is, outline what it is, clearly build a good argument that says, look, socioeconomic status is linked with PTSD. Use the right studies before you bring in these extra variables. A lot of my students, they try to run before they walk, and they bring in these other factors too early in the essay. And so now they're talking about socioeconomic status and PTSD, and the first study they talk about is Luby et al. Study. But the problem there is Luby never measured PTSD. So it's a great study to use if it's used at the right time. It's a great study to link socioeconomic status with post-traumatic stress disorder because of its link in the brain, but if we begin there, well, they didn't even measure PTSD. So how is this relevant? Suddenly your examiner's lost, they can't follow you. So step 1, step 2, right? And then you can further evaluate these studies. This all comes back to that model that I always fall back on. What is the etiology? Socioeconomic status. How is it linked to PTSD? With the studies, go deeper and say why, and then you're always asking but. I hope that was helpful. Coming up next, we'll look at the cognitive etiologies of post-traumatic stress disorder, and you're going to see some of these studies here are going to be recycled, right? And then that's the benefit also of being able to have this model, is you can use the same studies for different essays as long as you bring them in at the right point. I know this might be getting a little bit confusing and complex, and I'm continually trying to figure out how can I create resources and explain things so all students can understand the basics and get the fundamentals right, but then those who are aiming for 7s will be able to add the extras to really impress and show a deep level of understanding of psychology. I hope this is helpful, but I'm trying to get better at it. Also, thank you for the feedback on me speaking too slowly. That is something I am working on. Cheers, good luck.